Hi, and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very lucky today to be sitting down with Sue Atkins. Sue, who is a well-known parenting expert. Sue, you can probably tell us a bit more because there's more to the hats that you wear than that.
Gosh, where do I start? So I'm a former deputy head and class teacher for 20 odd years. And then I retrained and became, an NLP master practitioner and trainer. I specialised then in parenting because I was very interested in how that really, we give children self-esteem. And I actually think it starts from the parents. So that set me off, and I was invited to write my first book, Raising Happy Children for Dummies, one in the famous black and yellow one. Then I was invited to write my other one, Parenting Made Easy, How to Raise Happy Children, because it's all about raising happy children, but supporting the parents. No finger pointing, just a helping hand. That led to becoming BBC Radio. I'm on all of that loads of times. ITV This Morning, Disney's parenting expert, and an expert for corporations as well, like Danone. I input my expertise in all sorts of areas. Passionate about parenting, that's the bottom line. I specialise also in divorce. I've written the Divorce Journal for Kids and the Can Do Journal for Kids as well. So that's me. Go and look me up.
I love it. And you say that's it, but it's, that's a lot. That is a lot. And I think when just touching on what you were saying then about divorce and children, when we sort of put into that context, it's difficult enough. Divorce anyway is tough, and it doesn't always, some maybe go smoothly, and a lot of the time it doesn't. If you then add to the mix domestic abuse into that scenario, then we're talking a whole other ball game, aren't we? And it gets very, very complicated very quickly.
It can, and it can get very scary for the children very quickly, and it can get out of hand if you've got an incandescent person or a narcissist. These are very challenging times at the best of times. So navigating them, I would suggest you get some support, some proper help, because it's a bolt-on that's not easy. I mean, divorce isn't always easy. It doesn't go smoothly, but at least, if there is dignity and a bit of respect, that's not too bad. But if there's no respect and the other person isn't playing fair, then you are in a vulnerable position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to post-separation abuse, very often with victims, they find that, or survivors, or however anybody wants to identify themselves as, once they potentially leave that relationship, when it comes to divorce, is actually processing the fact that you've experienced abuse, then trying to process the divorce on top of that, knowing that one parent may very likely be trying to use coercive control as a means of continuing that control. They're losing the power, they're losing control over you and the children. So therefore, now we've got to up the ante. And very often it's the most dangerous time for somebody to leave is when they realise that, the perpetrator realises that's it, they're going, they're actually, getting out of the situation. And so in terms of advice that you would give to parents who are, so for example, if you're the parent that is trying to deal with a post-separation abuse situation, trying to deal with divorce, the children will have a lot of questions, and sometimes you're not always equipped to answer them. And you're right, support is the biggest thing, isn't it? Going, finding the right support through your local domestic abuse charity, whoever it is. But if you're in a situation where you're sort of only just coming to terms that you don't want to ask for help, because some people feel a bit ashamed, they feel embarrassed, how do you sort of have those conversations? Or are there coping mechanisms that a parent can use to help the child? It's difficult, isn't it?
It's always about the oxygen mask coming down on yourself first. Do not be ashamed. Do not feel embarrassed. This happens to all sorts of people. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not weak. It's happened. Recognizing it, wanting to get out of it is so brave and so courageous, and such the right thing to do for yourself. And therefore breaking the cycle for your children. Hold that thought. You are not passing on what I call intergenerational patterns in psychology. You are determined to break that. And then you can work on your own self-esteem, your own self-confidence. And that takes time. It's a muscle. We're not all just born with it. And it comes and goes and it wobbles and it's all that. But take solace from that. You're going to do something different now, and then when you've got yourself in a fairly good place, you're able then to pass on as a role model, because kids are watching, listening, learning from you all the time. And then you hold that space for them. Now, it's difficult because they love the other parent. They don't understand. It depends how old they are. If they're in their teens, they get it. But if they're only 6 or 7 or something, they don't understand why that's happening. But they certainly have watched and experienced stuff that you can change. Don't get stuck in the fact that, oh, well, they've experienced and seen things they shouldn't have seen. I'm guilty. I'm a terrible mother or father. I'm terrible. It's not that. You can change things. With support, you can get the kids some help. But also, it's down to you. If you start modeling different behavior, you change, they will change alongside of you, and therefore you have broken those patterns, and those children, your children, do not go on to get caught up in some of those sort of difficult relationships the next time.
That, you know, I was trying in my head then to think of all the different things you just said that are like, that's a brilliant point, and there were so many. I'm gonna have to go back and bullet point them now myself. 100% self-care is the key, because you cannot look after your children whilst you are in turmoil yourself and you are dealing with I always call it like 20,000 plates spinning. You could have support involved, you could have child maintenance involved, you could have selling a house, if there's so many things that you could be dealing with, change of schools if you've moved out of the area. There's so much to process. So looking after yourself is not being selfish. Definitely that point needs to be made. I think another really good point you make, which many people don't talk about, and it's something I'm really passionate about, is society doesn't appreciate that child will still love the perpetrator parent, regardless. It is still their parent. You know, we all have relationships with our parents where we can think, didn't like the way they handled that when I was growing up. Does it stop you loving them? No, you still love them. Just because a parent has behaved in a way that we know is wrong does not mean that child will stop loving that parent. And also, I don't know how well this goes across with people, but what I would often say is, you don't have to stop loving that person, but you also don't have to respect that behavior. You know, you can love somebody but not respect the behavior that they're displaying. And that to me is a real key point for a lot of that society doesn't seem to appreciate. It's, well, they're a perpetrator, they've abused you, therefore you should wash your hands of it. There you go, done and dusted. It doesn't work that way. Emotions don't work that way. Children don't work that way. And it's, you know, people like yourself, it's so important to get that message out there to people that, yes, it is okay that they love them. It isn't okay the way they've been treated. And that's where the help comes in and the support. You're 100% right. Yeah.
And it's almost like putting that somewhere, writing that down, or having a poster, you know, that you're not advertising, because if you're, you know, living with someone else and all of that, but you have it in your handbag, or you have it somewhere to remind you, or on your phone even, that you must look at that, you know, as a sort of a mantra to remember that, you know, it's not okay. I mean, there's another t-shirt, it's not okay.
It's not okay. Yeah,
you know, it really isn't okay, but you've got to manage it, and you've got to come through it and be kind to yourself, because any major life change, whether that is a divorce or leaving someone or redundancy or any of those major things, or death, they take 18 months to 2 years to process. Now, of course, not everyone's the same, and you may get over that much quicker. But when I was talking to Vanessa Feltz actually about her breakup with her partner, she didn't understand that. She thought she should be over it. It had been 6 weeks. And I said, takes as long as it takes. It's a process. It's not an event. And of course, when you are a parent, you've got to co-parent somehow with this person who doesn't like the fact that you're becoming more independent, more assertive. They may use the child as a pawn in a game that they don't understand. So you don't play that game. You don't go, what did you get up to at Dad's at the weekend, and how was it, and what time did you go to bed, and what's she like, and all that. Don't do all that. Try not to. Now, that isn't easy, but it's important. And then you are making a change, and be forgiving of yourself that it takes time. And as I said to you, I've just recently written Navigating, you know, Divorce, Suddenly Single, I call it, because sometimes it happens so quickly. Suddenly single. Right, I'm surviving, but how am I going to thrive? So I wrote it with that intention, because I went through a divorce myself. So but it's the process, and journaling is a great way to write down your thoughts. It's a safe space, particularly if you have left. Keep it somewhere secret, keep it somewhere private, move it around, put a lock on it, whatever you want to do with it. But by writing it down, thinking about it, venting, sharing, putting things in there, all sorts of drawing, whatever you want, it helps you heal. And therefore, I think you're then ready to help your kids. And I've got the divorce journal for kids as well, so they can process. And that's all very positive in many ways, but also talking about sad feelings or angry feelings, it gets conversations started that are a bit difficult sometimes, because I think talking to your children, talking with them, not at them, age appropriately. Don't start outpouring it with your 12-year-old stuff that they don't need to know and shouldn't have to deal with and feel the burden of. Get yourself, and don't just do it to your friends. Don't just go around with your friends with a bottle of wine and start on that. If you need some counselling or some help, absolutely get it, because it will be life-changing for you, but also for your children. And sometimes parents don't always think about that, but as soon as I say it's better for the kids, they'll break the cycle. They go, oh, I will go and get some help then.
Oh my God, that is so true. And when you talk about process, that in itself, I've always found it very difficult when people will say recovering from domestic abuse or moving on. And it isn't always the case. More often than not, you never actually move on. You move forward, because there will be time. There will be times where you have days where you're on top of the world. And I've done a podcast recently with a lady called Anna Knight, and she talks about this audacious. And you can have days where you are positive and you're feeling negative about things. You might be positive around the children, everything's wonderful, and at the same time you've just had a letter from family court that's telling you you're back there in 3 weeks because you've breached the order, whatever it is. And then you can be straight back down again. So you can have all those emotions, but it's that moving forward and accepting that this is now part of who you were, and you don't have to be ashamed of it. It's created who you are now as a human being, and for your children, like you say. And such a big thing with children as well is we don't appreciate that every child is different, and you could have siblings who one is more than happy to open up and more than happy to go for counselling and support, age appropriate, obviously, kind of support. And then you'll have another child that's just not interested, just doesn't want to do it. And I think one of the biggest things I used to try and do when I worked for local charity was, you have to give them time. You can't force anyone, can you? That's a biggie, isn't it?
No, and respect that. And they may come to it. And funny enough, I remember with somebody I worked with, she came to that at 40. She had been a child of that. And it was when she wanted to look into it and process it and change it. And that is her journey, her process. That's why I say it's not an event. And anything we can do to look after each other, respect the journey. But and talking and sharing and listening is a big thing. I think we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen. They're telling you what they're worried about, or how they feel, or they've got nightmares or night terrors, or they're anxious about Saturday when they have to go, to the other partner's house, or whatever it is. So, respect that and listen, and then you can support them in the way they would like to be supported. That's the difference. It's not how we rush into rescue, we'll sort it. Sometimes just what I call pausing to ponder, taking a step back and just listening to the kids. Then you can work out their different personalities and different stages and ages, what they need. So it's important.
It is. And I often think when you talk about children, for example, you've just started secondary school, or you just started your A-levels, as I call it, still sixth form, but I know it's not now. I get confused with the years 12, 13.
Don't talk to me. I'm an oldie.
I'm lower six, upper six. That's all I remember. But when they're starting these new kind of times in their life, really big moments like secondary, primary as well. And there is obviously all this tension in the background. That child has so much, and that teenager has so much to process anyway, with navigating their social skills, navigating the world as it is now, and everything is very much online, everything's social media. And then on top of that, having to then, for some children, feel like they're tiptoeing and go, on eggshells when they go home, because they don't want to upset mum, or they don't want to upset dad. And they're torn between the two. And that really, to me, is heartbreaking. And I think the more we talk about these things, and I love the fact that you're doing this, because it makes me so proud that with domestic abuse, so many people, I use those words and they're kind of like, what, don't want to talk about it, it's
taboo, isn't it? A bit taboo.
Taboo subject. But if we don't talk about it, how many children are we missing out on helping?
Absolutely. And it's actually like mental health, but nobody talked about it. No one talked about it in sport. Suddenly, thank goodness, and everybody is now open and chatting around it, so that it's taking down the stigma. And what you're doing is very important. As you were talking, actually, I was thinking about kids going to not secondary, going to university or going out into the world, navigating relationships themselves for the first time. And it's important that we look at that. So you've given them a buffer, or you've given them some skills around what to look for, where the red flag may be coming, and you think, oh, you overlook it. Someone said to me once, when she was a great therapist and she was my friend and we were chin wagging and chatting, she said something, so when did you override that thought or that feeling you had about that? And I went, God, that was, and I went back to it. Oh yeah, I did recognize that, but I pushed through. So it's, again, teaching your children when to find that balance. And that can be even with bullying, even at school and stuff. But certainly when you were talking, I suddenly thought, off they go to a new period of their lives. Perhaps it's sixth form, or perhaps it's uni, and the boundaries around that. And there's lots of talk about how situations can get out of hand very quickly there, also with booze and all sorts of things. So supporting them, teaching them, educating them in a healthy way. I was bullied at school at 11, and when I changed school, I got alopecia actually from the bullying, because I didn't tell anyone. So I'm always about talking about your problems and getting the help you need. So as soon as I told, my dad saw me crying or something, everything changed, and I got the support and help I needed, and I changed schools and all that sort of thing. And then it is about, I was a bit over the top. I was too assertive when I was only 12. And don't you touch my school bag, that's my, and all this, because I wanted to be more assertive. I hadn't been assertive enough in my last school, so I was over the top. Again, I want kids to understand sort of how to navigate that and find that balance, but certainly never override that moment when you think, oh, I don't think that was, quite appropriate. It's the same thing, because, don't want to get too controversial, but Russell Brand, all these women who weren't being heard and people facilitating that. I think we might be in a different space now with boundaries and red flags around stuff like that.
Absolutely. And, what wasn't always kind of put in the news years ago is constantly in the news now. And it's, in some ways, I hope that it makes people think a little bit more about how, you hope that people think a little bit more about how they, get into relationships and things, because we have all the technology now where anybody can do anything to anyone, and a relationship ends and it can get very, very nasty. And, there is a lot there that's evidence within that phone that person has, if you like, that they can use against you or whatever it is. And you think, oh my God, for a teenager especially, it can be very dark days if they've said things that, they might not have said in front of their parents, but they've said it to the boyfriend or said it to the girlfriend, and that person now goes, well, we're no longer together, I'm going to make an example of you and laugh about this. I mean, heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And I think, I don't want to sound like my mom, but I often think I'm glad I didn't grow up with a lot of technology. There wasn't, there were 3 channels. There was B1, B2 and ITV. That was it. And then Channel 4 was quite new. And then, but then, it was simpler in some ways, but domestic abuse has always been there. And we have to look at technology as being a positive, in the sense that we can bring it to light. We can bring those conversations out into the open that weren't being had before. And I think if we try and stop thinking of domestic abuse as just being the physical, and we open our eyes, and our ears a little bit, and say, okay, so explain to me what it is. Because I actually spoke to somebody recently, and they were talking about domestic violence. And I was saying, well, actually, that is only part of the issue. There's a much bigger issue at play, which is the emotional, the psychological, the financial, the sexual, it goes on and on. And more often than not, you find statistically that there will be 2 or 3 of those abuses that will go on at the same time. It's very rare that it would just be emotional. A lot of the time there's other things that come into play. And if that's happening when a child is living at home, and a big one I'm always passionate about is that learned behavior. If a child is witnessing this all the time, A parent should never, ever feel bad for leaving that situation, because you're taking your child out of that situation where they are learning that that is normal behavior. And that's a difficult one to process, I think, for a lot of people.
I think it's really important what you're saying. And I wrote an article around, you know, and I'm all about going to the root cause. I thought, how can I support? How can I help? How can I change this? And so, yes, that's in the now. I also go right back to the sort of beginning of how you speak to your children as toddlers, what boys learn from both mum and from dad about relationships, about respect, about the way we speak to each other, the way we speak about old people, you know, all sorts of things. It starts in the home. And I sent you a bit of research in Australia around children that have strong parental relationships, because it's about connection and respect, and you learn that, you teach that. And you know, people listening to that, oh, it's a bit late for me. Well, it's never too late. But actually, people listening perhaps to it, you start early teaching boys to respect girls and how they speak to their sister. You nip it in the bud about, is that teasing or is that bullying at home? So all of these small things add up to being a big difference over time. Absolutely. And, you know, with support with school, with support with parents and grandparents, they're learning everything all the time. So be mindful of that. Respect is a key energy of any happy family.
You know, it's, well, obviously you know your stuff better than most people. And interestingly, I did some training, oh God, last year or the year before, and it was in Trafford, and it was talking about what's the one thing, what's the top, in this survey they did with teenagers, what's the top priority for a teenager in any relationship? And it's respect. That's what came out on top. And it's so simple, isn't it? It's so simple. And that was all.
And it's a divisive world, though, isn't it? I mean, if you put the news on and I don't want to be too political, I won't name names, will I? You know, it's very divisive. At the moment, we've got the, you know, Hamas-Israeli war going on, which is just appalling and so polarized. But actually, I listened to quite a few podcasts, and Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, about how to agree disagreeably, you know, agreeably, because respect, that's what it's about. This polarization and putting people at, you know, divisive, that just creates anger and doesn't create respect. We have to respect people who are different to us. That's where the interest lies, isn't it? Absolutely. You know, someone, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I don't know. I'm not brought up there. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me about your food, even. You know, anything where we can be curious rather than judgmental is much, much better. And respect comes into all of that.
It does. And I think if we all had that quote's just popped in my head, and I don't want to misquote, but it, you know, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I defend your right to say it to the death. And I think I want to say it's Voltaire, but it's a long time since I was at school and studying, but it is the idea that if we all just respect, you know, my husband and I have very different opinions on things, but what we agree on is parenting. We very much agree on that. You know, we don't have political agreements all the time or societal agreements all the time, but that doesn't stop us having a strong marriage and respecting one another. Because at the end of the day, he respects my opinion, I respect his. And that's all it comes down to. It doesn't have to be that one person is right and the other is wrong. It is very much a case of we all need to be, and if we all were a bit more respectful, well, then life, I think, would be much easier. A whole different ball game. And I think thinking of the respect aspect is when it's parents who are looking for that support through schools, it's having respect within yourself to say, I know some parents I've worked with have said, I don't want to bother the school, I don't want to, but actually have enough respect in yourself to say, but these are my children and they need the help. And that's what the school is there for. You're not a burden to them. You're not going in and creating more work for them. They have the facilities, they have
and they want to help. If they don't know, they can't help. And so I come back again to work on your own self-esteem and your self-confidence, because it's battered. It's been battered if you've been in a relationship with somebody who's been emotionally, you know, abusing you and putting you down all the time about what you're wearing that skirt for, why you're wearing those shoes. Even those small things are constantly belittling and taking away and, you know, scratching away at your self-esteem. So do some work on yourself, your confidence, and believe that you are worthy, and you are worthy of being loved, but you are worthy of respect, and you are worthy of going in to protect your children.
Absolutely. And do you know what? I've come to learn saying no is not always a bad thing. We are allowed
No.
to say no. You know, we've sort of become a society of yes to everything. And actually it is okay to say no sometimes, and say, actually, I need to think of my own well-being right now, and say that, no, do you know, as lovely as it would be to go out this evening or whatever it is, I'm not feeling it, and I'm not being miserable, and I'm not being boring. I'm just putting my own needs first. My body's telling me I need a bath and an early night.
See, I wrote a blog about that, because saying no, and I don't know whether it's even British as well. You add being sort of self-deprecating and being British or something. Oh no! So people, even at work, I mean, it's all over the place, and people sort of crowding in on your boundaries. Doesn't mean that you're being aggressive or rude,
No.
but also I did a whole load of phrases that you can use. It's on LinkedIn somewhere. I think it's on my website. I'm not sure, because I do different things sometimes on LinkedIn than I do on my parenting blogs and stuff. But saying no is such an important thing. And when I'm working with clients on that, going through a divorce or something, I often just get them to do some small things, like saying no to a coffee or something.
Absolutely.
Build up your confidence, because saying no actually is honoring yourself, respecting yourself. And at work, just say, well, thank you for asking me to do that extra thing. And there's phrases around how you handle batting it back. It doesn't suit you at this moment. And otherwise you end up resentful.
Yes.
And that's not a good thing either.
No, and you don't want to get to a point in your life where I used to work for another charity many years ago, and we had this profiler come in, and you've just made me think of it now. And I would have been in my late 30s at that point, and he profiled everybody, and it was this circle, and everybody was a different colour. And I'm kind of, in this circle with a few other people, but not many. And quite a lot were in the dominant red part of the circle. And I'm in kind of like the pale blue, greeny bit. And mine was, Lucy, you have no boundaries. You don't know what to say now. And it was really interesting, because then he did one-to-ones with everybody afterwards. And he just said, and I then started talking about, I grew up as one of 6, and, big family, and brought up in a time where you were seen and not heard, and you were respectful to everybody. You didn't ask for respect, but you gave respect, that kind of idea. And it meant that by my late 30s, I had no boundaries. I just didn't know when to say no. So when I'd get overwhelmed at work and having 20,000 things coming in, it's because I didn't learn in my childhood, or as I became a teenager or went to university, I didn't know when to say no. And again, you're right. It doesn't have to be negative. No doesn't have to be a negative. It can actually be a positive. And saying no to your children sometimes. And that's, oh,
I've written about that one. Definitely. What do you want them to learn? Because when they go out in the real world, they're not going to have all their whims, acknowledged and fulfilled. So yes, no is important. So actually, if you're listening to this and you think, oh, I need to sort of think about that, there's a whole area there to go and explore around how to say no.
And the thinking about that, when you are a parent of a child or children who have experienced domestic abuse, all that parent wants to do is give that child everything, because you think you're filling a void. And that's where I think no becomes even more important, because you want to just try and make up for the sadness that you think they're feeling. All their friends' parents are married, and everything is wonderful, and they're the only ones. And
I'll send you that blog link. You can stick it somewhere if it's helpful to someone.
I will.
Put it somewhere helpful.
I will.
Around, saying no with confidence, I think the blog is called.
That would be brilliant.
That guy, all these things, there's no one size fits all. All these small little things that you might listen to here today might just guide you on another little path, add it to your toolkit, and over time you'll have, change situations and your mindset and your thinking, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that, because it is everything we've just been talking about now is around domestic abuse, but it's also around parenting. And it is that there is a link, and there are things that can be relevant to a parent that hasn't experienced it, and there are things that are relevant, maybe sometimes more relevant for a parent that is experiencing trying to raise a child after abuse or during abuse. Because one thing I often say as well, and many people sort of look at me like I'm bonkers, is I've worked with people who've said, I don't want to leave, I just want to know how to stay safe while I'm staying with that person. That's a toughie. That's a real toughie, because how on earth do you do that safely when there are children involved as well? Obviously the best solution is to be out of the situation.
That person is not ready, and so you have to be respectful of that.
Yeah.
And when they are ready, and hopefully not when it's too late in terms of anything really horrid happening,
Yeah.
but they're the signals to get ready and do the work on yourself, perhaps, and look at options and look at what's out there. And the other thing to remember is hope. We have to give people hope. If people have hope, they can withstand and move forward slowly and, whatever they need to do, because they know where they're going. And when I work with parents going through even just an ordinary, not a domestic situation of abuse towards, I say, well, tell me where you would love to live. And I get them to relax, and they describe the home that they're going to be in, or the flat, or the little garden, or they're going to be growing vegetables, or where it's based, is it in the country, in the city, etc. Because suddenly they are going towards that, and it will take time. It may take quite a long time, but they're going to take some small steps because they know they can get there. And I remember I was up in London, and I went to Trafalgar Square, and I'd never really watched opera much. I'm not a fan of it, but my friend said, oh, come on, it's great, bring a picnic, we'll go up to Trafalgar Square, they've got a big screen. So we were sitting, we had a picnic, we sat on the floor, and we got chatting to this lady, and she was a policewoman, and she had been married to a policeman who, unfortunately, it was an abusive situation, and she got all her stuff together and ran out of there with just one pair of shoes or something, she described it. And then she said, oh, but now I live in this tiny little place in blah, blah. And she went on to detail it all. And she was so happy. And so that's where you've got to guide people, that you will get to that happier, more relaxed, positive place in time.
You couldn't sum it up any better. I think it is, hope is the biggest. It's one of the driving forces behind my website. Is the blogs are about hope. They're not about saying, this is it, this is your lot in life, deal with it. No, it's not. If you open up yourself to the possibilities of what you can do in the future and be hopeful, and just have hope in that, there could be one thing that day that's gone right for you, and you just think, okay, there's a glimmer of hope. There's that glimmer of hope, and that's all you need, is that little bit. And I often, some people love quotes and some people hate them. Well, my family know I love a good quote, and I put them very often at the end of the blogs. And I did one recently around optimism versus hope, because often people think it's the same thing.
Semantics.
There's a Desmond Tutu quote, and he says, I'm not an optimist, but I'm a prisoner of hope. And I just thought, I love that. That's that. You don't have to be optimistic and going around happy all the time. It doesn't happen.
I'm pretty positive, but it's not about being Pollyanna and ridiculous, but I'm genuine. And it takes a hit and a battering with cost of living crisis, with all sorts of things that are on top of us that can, some days weigh us down. So, but it's about, at times, having an attitude of gratitude, which again is not Pollyanna. It's been proven by loads of research, and that's why it's in my journals for kids and for parents and stuff, around looking at what you are grateful for. And you just gently do that, and if you can get to maybe 3 or 4, maybe not only 1, but then you suddenly shift, your mindset shifts, your body physically changes, because you start to relax, and you can then feel grateful for the small stuff. And I've really got into that, and it's a simple thing, but I find it really helpful each day to start the day even like that, with what am I grateful for.
I was going to ask you what would be a bit of advice that you would, in terms of what would be the one thing you would say to parents who were going through a very tough time. And I think you're right, that remembering that there are things to be grateful for. You've woken up, you can see, you can walk. I know it sounds like all very small.
No. I have a special cup of coffee every day in a lovely mug and a lovely saucer. Sounds silly, but it's a fresh, proper coffee, from my espresso or something. And I sit and enjoy that, and I think about what I'm grateful for. And it's not every day you find that easy. But the other one to look at, I do it with kids as well, is the last thing at night. How do you set yourself up for a good night's sleep? Now, if you sit there worrying and we all do it, going in what Tony Robbins calls, I'm trained by him, going in a figure of 8, round and round in circles around the same problem, and then you expect to fall asleep. That's not going to be great. So you've got to find things that shape that and change that. I remember when I was going through my divorce, it was so strange, but as I climbed the stairs going up to bed, it would start, the negative things. And I noticed that's when it started. So once I noticed, I went, oh, I've got to shake them up. I've got to make hot tablet. I've got to keep to my journal and write down what I'm grateful for today, what I've achieved or done, very small things, went to the post office, whatever it is, because that then triggers me to fall asleep in a happier place. I also listen to sort of guided meditation stuff, not again happy Pollyanna and isn't it marvelous, but something that suits me, that helps me fall asleep, not overthinking. So do find those 2 times in the day, because that the day will set you up for a better day and the night will set you up for a better sleep. So I think that's important.
Oh, absolutely. I think and again, for children, morning, especially if they don't to school and they're a bit anxious about it, having had lockdown, and for a lot of children who are starting secondary now, I think many parents are overlooking or not maybe noticing that the children are a bit more agitated. It's because they've had that lovely bubble at home where they've been with mom, dad, whoever for that period of time, and now they're out in the big wide world. And I think if as parents we all can be a little bit more understanding and remember that we know that, thank goodness, we're not in lockdowns anymore. But in those children's minds, that's huge, to live through something like that. And
it is,
And if you're going through a domestically abusive situation at the same time, that's a lot for a child to process. So, like you say, meditation. Children, my daughter in particular, she loves meditation music at night. She just has it on low. She loves it. And it is for her like a reset thing. And she knows then she's safe, she's calm, she's okay, and she's going to get a good night's sleep.
I'm actually talking to my friend Marnetta. She does Relax Kids, and she started this. She was the original Relax Kids. There's loads of them now. She was on Dragon's Den. She didn't win it, but she's still here 25 years later. I love her stuff. Her guided meditations, everything she does is wonderful. So do go and check out Relax Kids. In fact, I'm talking to her, as I said, this afternoon about some stuff. But find whatever it is that supports yourself and your kids, and do more of it. You just pause to ponder what makes me feel good, and do more of that sometimes.
And do more of that. I want to keep you on all day, but I know you're a very busy lady. And I think we could do these many, many times over and come up with different things each time. But everything you have said is, in my head, is just like tick, tick, yes. It's 100% true. And things that I hadn't even thought about. So I can't thank you enough, Sue. You are amazing. And and hopefully I'll put when you obviously around the blog about I'll get that on the website on the resources page. Relax Kids, so people can go and have a look.
You said something I like, audacious and is it?
Audacious and Anna Knight, her links, she's a life coach, her links on the website. It's
gonna look that up.
Yeah,
we must maybe do a power hour or something together to help parents again, or a guest blog on my website about something you'd like to talk about, because I think this is very important to break down this taboo around talking about it and then knowing what to do. So you don't just talk about it, you give some form of solutions to people. Absolutely. Gives them hope. And that's what we're both about.
That's the beauty of this, isn't it? It's talking about domestic abuse doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It is about what can we do to make change, what can we do to help people, raise that awareness. And for everybody who just wants to be happy. That's all any of us want, isn't it? Really deep down.
Of course it is. If you ask, when you nitty gritty it down to all the parents I've worked with over all the years, what do you want for your kids? Happiness.
Happiness.
That's the end of it.
That's it. That's perfect. I love that as an ending as well.
Lovely to spend time with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Take care.